For this presentation, I chose the topic of dress code in schools. I chose this because I often feel that dress codes unfairly target certain groups of students or they are inconsistently enforced. First, some background with schools and First Amendment issues. The first really big case was the 1969 Tinker case. In this case, 3 students were suspended for wearing anti-war armbands in school. The Supreme Court ruled that the students do have First Amendment rights, and that in order to restrict a student's rights, there must be a justifiable and legitimate reason to do so. So, for example, schools can only restrict students' rights when they have a legitimate reason, such as maintaining order in the schools. Further Supreme Court cases have upheld the rights of schools to restrict student rights in certain circumstances. So, for example, the Bethel School District number 403 versus Frazier case in 1983. This case was concerning a student who was punished for a lewd and vulgar speech. In this case, the Supreme Court upheld the rights of schools to prohibit speech which is considered vulgar or offensive. An additional case was the Hazelwood case. In this case, the Supreme Court upheld the right of the schools to remove items from a school newspaper. So generally, the Supreme Court has upheld the rights of schools to restrict students' First Amendment rights in situations where they have a legitimate reason to do so. However, the Supreme Court has not heard a case specifically concerning school dress codes. Lower courts, however, have generally upheld school dress codes as long as they have been applied in a neutral manner. So, for example, a school, if a school were to have a policy restricting slogans on T-shirts, this should be like political slogans on T-shirts. It would have to be neutral and apply to all political slogans on all T-shirts. There are some common dress code restrictions with schools that do have written dress codes. There are certain very common types of restrictions on student dress. So, for example, clothing which depicts themes that are vulgar or that reference drug use are generally banned. There are also usually limits on clothing length or clothing which fails to cover certain parts of the body. So, for example, sleeveless shirts or really short skirts. Also, clothing which shows affiliation with criminal gangs, and this can be clothing of certain types of colors or different anything related to gang activity. Also, hats and baseball caps, bandanas, things like that are often restricted, and certain types of loose-fitting or baggy pants are often part of dress codes. There's a number of things that I think should a dress code should include. So to be fair, and a school dress code should be written and approved by the school board. This should limit the type of biases involved when it's up to an individual administrator or teacher to use his own judgment to determine what is he considers appropriate or not. Dress codes should also be non-discriminatory. So dress codes shouldn't single out certain groups of students rather than others. Dress codes should be consistently and fairly enforced. I've often seen how, for example, girls who have parents who are more influential in the community, if they violate the dress code, this often gets overlooked, whereas it's enforced for students, poor or minority students. They're more likely to get sent to the office for a dress code violation. And I think the dress code should also take into account changing cultural norms. So, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, girls usually couldn't wear pants in school. But of course now It would be hard to imagine a dress code which would not allow a girl to wear jeans in a public school. So, for example, different hairstyles, coloring hair, things like that. I think that the dress code really should take into account the culture is changing and what might have been really disruptive in previous decades, such as a student with blue hair, may not necessarily be that disruptive today. Dress codes. Uh, uh, th there's an argument that dress codes can often promote gender bias. So a lot of dress codes are often targeted towards women's dress more than men's dress. So, for example, a lot of the issues dealing with like skirt length or spaghetti strap tops, a lot of these things are more targeted towards women. And the result of this can lead to a type of body shaming where it can make girls feel more self-conscious and uncomfortable with their bodies. Now, this is particularly the case when girls are called out in front of class or sent to the office and forced to wear some type of embarrassing t-shirt to cover themselves up. So I think that schools should be really conscious of this and the effects these dress codes might have or the way they're enforced on girls in the schools. Uh, this also, an argument could be made that these type of dress codes are putting the responsibilities on girls to control the inappropriate behaviors of boys. So oftentimes these types of dress codes are legitimized by saying that this type of dress will distract the boys in the class. So I think we should be really conscious and aware of how this unfairly puts the responsibility on the girls to control boys' behaviors. There's also a lot of issues with dress code and LGBT students around the country. So there are several cases where dress codes are unfairly applied to LGBT students for not conforming to gender norms and clothing choices. Also, there have been cases where transgender students are not allowed to dress according to their gender identity, but towards but are forced to wear clothes with their biological gender, and this really shouldn't be the case. So students should dress codes really should not be enforced in ways that single out certain groups unfairly. There are also a number of issues with dress codes and minorities. So, for example, a dress code should never uh, forbid a student from wearing religious type clothing such as headscarves or turbans if this is part of a person's religious practice. Also, there have been a number of cases of dress codes prohibiting things like certain types of African American hairstyles. So there have been cases around the country. One, the Horizon Science Academy in Ohio, for example. There's an article a while back about how they banned hairstyles such as afro puffs, dreadlocks, small twisted braids, and cornrows. So these dress codes targeted African American students and their hairstyles specifically. Uh, Also, I think we should really look at the necessity of having a ban on things like baggy pants in the dress codes in schools. I think this is I don't see why, as long as students aren't really having real revealing clothing, why baggy pants in particular should be banned. This is just a style of dress, and I don't feel that it is that disruptive. And it also can tend to target certain uh, styles which are predominantly worn by minority students. Here are some of my references.